So basically, if we can sum up this list of recommendations, this laundry list that I made a few slides back, we can take the degree of endangerment and take different steps depending on how endangered a language is. And of course, in some situations, these steps are appropriate. In other situations, you might want to modify these quite a bit or not intervene in the school, but in other domains. But generally, if a language is doing okay, but it's threatened, that's sort of a mid-level assessment, and level 3 on some of those charts there, then interventions can be effective in the education domain and in the domain of new media. If a language is endangered, so maybe a level 2 on some of these assessment schemes, then there has to be an active effort to expand the domains from not just maintain the existing domains, but expand from what it's being used at. So if a language is only used in the home, Professor Schiffman was very sanguine about the possibilities for certain languages, but I think it's always also useful to be as optimistic as possible while being cautious. And so if one can try to expand the use of a language beyond the home into another domain, such as public rituals, why not try? So that would be an example of revitalization. And finally, for critically endangered language, where in languages where there are few or no more speakers, then the first and most urgent task is some kind of documentation for possible future revitalization. So that's generally in a nutshell. And so two concerns that are always concerns about grant-giving agencies and non-governmental organizations, as well as governmental organizations, are sustainability and interoperability. I just want to touch on these briefly before I close. So we always want an effort that we make to be sustainable after we finished a particular project. So, and many of these things, of course, are built in already into economic development projects, but you have to think about them a little bit differently in the realm of language documentation. So it's really important to build local documentation capability. So the mechanics of audio-visual recording, data capture, transcription, basic techniques, basic linguistics, and so on, to build local infrastructure. This doesn't have to be something fancy. We don't even have to call it an archive, but some sort of means of storing and forward migrating data to train especially students and young peoples in these methodologies, and to consider piloting longitudinal studies which allows us to track all over the longer term the effectiveness of our work and make adjustments over time. There should be another bullet point there, but to promote the economic and social advantages of linguistic diversity, and if there aren't linguistic and social advantages, then one might have a hard time. Usually one can, economic and social. Usually one can, communities can find good arguments for one or the other if language maintenance is desired. And of course there are newly identified Tibeto-Burman languages, and what I mean by that, of course, their speakers knew about these languages all along, but these are officially identified languages. This is going to be very interesting to see how China's language policy evolves with regard to these newly identified families that don't appear in many classificatory structures. Finally, last comments about interoperability. We tend to think about projects in isolation, so we do development project over here, and then 3,000 miles away, development project over there. But we want, especially if we're going to the time and expense of creating language resources, we want these to be hopefully in the same or interchangeable formats so that people can use for example, a templatic model to create teaching materials, or use the same handbook to learn how to document, to transcribe and create teaching materials out of language materials. And so this is a matter of fonts, of data formats, and technology, and kind of standardizing across a network of projects. And it's a big issue. I'll just leave it at that. And creating social networks and data networks that interconnect. So usually techie people tend to overemphasize data networks, and anthropology types and often economic development organizations tend to emphasize social networks. We need them to interdigitate with the community, the needs of the community at the center of, and the wishes of the community at the center of this work. And these resources then, the ideal would be for them to be repurposable in a number of contexts. So that's all I want to say.